Now, U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to hold a Situation Room meeting on Iran on Monday with his top national security and foreign policy team. This according to an Axios report that cited 3 U.S. officials. The report comes hours after Trump reiterated that the United States holds all the cards in the war with Iran. The report suggests Trump's team would discuss the stalemate in the negotiations and potential next steps. He canceled a trip of his envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Islamabad on Saturday. He dismissed the talks as sitting around talking about nothing. Speaking to Fox News, Trump said that Iranian officials can speak to the negotiators by telephone whenever they want.
It's a 17, 18-hour flight. I said, when is this meeting taking place? And it was like going to be on Tuesday, and it was Saturday, and they're leaving, and by the time they get there, it's hours and hours and hours of flying. And I said, we're not doing this anymore. We have all the cards. If they want to talk, they can come to us or they can call us. There is a telephone.
As peace efforts between Tehran and Washington hang in the balance, the Axios report suggests that Iran has sent a new proposal to the Americans via mediator Pakistan. It focuses first on resolving the crisis over the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. blockade. It proposes negotiations on Iran's nuclear program take place at a later stage. Now, this as Iran's foreign minister is headed to Russia. Russia's foreign ministry said that Abbas Araghchi was traveling to Moscow for talks without providing more details. Earlier, Iran's ISNA news agency quoted Tehran's ambassador to Russia, Kazem Jalali, saying Araghchi is expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Monday to consult with Russian officials regarding the latest status of the negotiations, ceasefire, and surrounding developments. Well, on Saturday, Araghchi met Pakistan's military chief, Asim Munir, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar before traveling to Oman and returning to Islamabad. Ibrahim Razaei, who is serving as spokesperson for Iran's National Security and Foreign Policy Commission, has claimed that Pakistan lacks the credibility required for mediation. In a statement on X, he described Islamabad as a good friend and neighbor, but argued it is not a suitable intermediary and tends to align with U.S. interests. And to discuss more on this, we're now being joined by Elizabeth Laris live from Taipei, Taiwan, who is in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan Fellow and a visiting fellow at National Zhengzhou University. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Now, Trump is expected to hold a Situation Room meeting on Iran on Monday with his top national security and foreign policy team. At this point where direct talks are not happening, what is the most reliable deal possible between the two sides, according to you?
Well, unfortunately, right now, the two sides have worked themselves into their respective corners. Iran has said that the U.S. must remove its blockade of Hormuz. Meanwhile, U.S. says Iran must reopen the strait and without fees. Now, the question is, who's really calling the shots, perhaps literally, in Iran? Is it the government, the state government, or is it the IRGC, the Iranian, Guard? So there's a question about, who would the United States really, truly, negotiate with? So the discussions that the Trump team is going to have is, he pulled back Witkoff and Kushner from going to Pakistan on Tuesday. And so he said, okay, let's just have an office meeting. Sorry, they were supposed to go over the weekend. Now he's going to have an office meeting and say, where do we go from here? Because it's kind of fruitless if we just do this shuttling back and forth and we're not making any progress. Again, because now Iran is saying, we don't want to talk about nukes at all. I mean, that was the initial issue why, Trump decided to attack Iran was the nuke issue and also the ballistic issue. But now Iran is saying, hey, we're not going to talk about any of that until we talk about the immediate things. And that is extending the ceasefire, dropping the blockade, reimbursing us for war costs. So now we've got that bundle on top of what Trump really wants to talk about before the two sides can actually sit down and have meaningful discussions.
And of course, as you mentioned, Iran says a further conversation is only possible if U.S. lifts the blockade. But lifting blockade, at least for the U.S., it would mean that, of course, that's the only leverage that U.S. actually has for any future talks to remove Iran's stockpile of uranium. This seems like a sticking point right there. So do you see any off-ramp possible in this point?
I'm not seeing that very clearly right now. I'm really not, and maybe that's why the Iranian foreign minister is going to Russia to meet Putin. Pretty much as we speak. You're trying to get perhaps leverage from Russia. Literally, again, you pull out the big guns, you get a big partner to back you up. Perhaps the Iranian government is thinking that Putin has like a particular relationship with Trump, and then will put a bug in the ear of Trump. Also, Iran wants Russia to introduce some draft legislation on the UN Security Council, opposing the blockade. So there's a whole ball of wax here that I think it's really, really hard to see clearly right now.
You talked about, of course, the Iran foreign minister in Russia. He's going to be talking to Vladimir Putin, according to reports. He was also there in Oman, and he was also there in Pakistan. So how do you observe these efforts by Iran traveling to these countries at a point where, of course, there's no direct conversation between U.S. and Iran, but Trump saying that a telephone conversation would do?
Well, Iran is really trying to shore up its position. It evidently believed that Pakistan could play a role because the foreign minister went there a couple of times, went to Pakistan, then over to Oman, back to Pakistan, and now to Russia. Talk about flying a lot. And so Iran is really, really trying to figure out how it can deal with the United States. And again, international relations is played in public. It's also in private. So it looks like there's a lot of private shuttle diplomacy going on. Publicly, it's not being announced because it doesn't want to look like it's panicking. The other thing I wanted to mention, regarding relations with Russia is there is that international north-south transport corridor that it goes actually from St. Petersburg to Mumbai via Iran. And it looks like Iran is trying to further develop that. Why? Because it avoids then Western sanctions. So that may be another reason why he's going to Russia, is to shore up, accelerate development of that north-south transport corridor, which is such a vital link for Iran to get arms, trade, cargo from Russia.
And of course, we had reports of Russia proposing to take the uranium enrichment that Iran has at present, wherever they have stored it. How do you see, would that also be one of the talks when we look at the Iranian and Russia talks at the moment, when the FM is there in Petersburg?
Well, I mean, in Petersburg, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know how secure that north-south transport corridor is. Because it goes through some territory that may or may not be, so friendly to Iran. The cards shift sometimes. It has to go through the Caspian Sea. And so we have to look at vulnerabilities to that. But that's a huge issue, obviously, for the United States. You're just kind of reshuffling the deck by moving, material, enriched uranium material from Iran to Russia. I'm sure the United States is going to need to address that.
And now Trump has signaled in an interview with Fox News that he wants to continue the naval blockade that is choking off Iran's oil exports, hoping that it will get Iran to cave over the next few weeks. Do you think Iran will concede? Or, of course, this is impacting the global economy. So do you think that the global economy will suffer before Iran actually concedes?
Iran is going to hold out as long as possible. Its economy, of course, is suffering. It will suffer more. The Iranians fought an 8-year war with Iraq throughout the decade of the 80s and lost hundreds of thousands of people in that war. So they're really used to sticking it out. They will need to find some type of a face-saving maneuver. It would be really helpful if the United States can help them with that. The United States can also continue the blockade for a very long time. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, the United States is quite secure in its oil and gas energy supplies. As a matter of fact, we're sending them to Japan. It was big news in Japan when a tanker arrived from the United States because much of the world is either desperate for energy because they don't have it domestically, or they're poor and they have to pay a lot for it, and the prices are going up. And in those countries, their governments are increasingly destabilized by high energy costs. So the United States, even though it is politically and economically unpopular, a barrel of oil in the United States, West Texas and Brent, is still averaging over 100. It's not much over 100 yet. When it gets to be 120 or so, that's when the Americans are really going to come out, and you'll see the markets shift, and then Trump might respond to that.
Well, at this moment, it looks like a stalemate, and none of them want to concede with their own negotiation points. We'll have to wait and see what happens next. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your insights. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.